Hey folks, my name is Adam and I like to make tiny nerdy things. And I really wanted to make a dinosaur, but I also really wanted to make a turtle. And deep down, I realized that what I truly wanted to make was a middle-aged Italian plumber. I always liked the idea of making realistic versions of existing characters, and I thought maybe a semi-realistic interpretation of the Koopa King might be kind of fun. I'll start by building an armature out of thick gauge wire, then framing it in aluminium. I'm not really following any sort of scale here, so the fact that he ends up with pretty good proportions is very much a happy accident. Typically, I'd get some sort of scalar picture and make my armature to follow that general shape. But I didn't this time. 'Cause reasons, I'm sure. Once I've covered all the exposed wire in a thin layer of clay, I'll start marking out where I want the muscle to lie. I want him to retain his bipedal, overly muscular upper body, so I'm gonna lean into the ridiculously large muscles. Once I've got most of the muscle built up and roughly shaped, I'll wrap the torso with some wire and then yank it tight. This will give me a nice, secure bit of wire to build my tail on top of. And I'm ready to really make this BOWSER obscenely buff. We're talking bulging biceps, terrifying triceps, boulder shoulders, tree trunks for legs, and you get the point. Basically, he's gonna be jacked. And then once I've cut out all the individual muscles, I'll gently blend them all together, which should leave me with a more realistic looking, albeit still shockingly muscular King Koopa. Finally, before I get to the surface detail, I'll make his feet by squooshing some small sausages onto his horse hooves, and then adding a tiny bit of detail on top of those. Now, as far as surface detail is concerned, there's a few options, but I tend to lean towards the easiest because I'm kinda lazy. I want to give BOWSER's skin a scaly texture, but the idea of adding all those scales makes my balls itch. So instead, I'm going to make a tiny, adorable texture roller. Poking tiny indents into the clay, then baking it, it should allow me to apply textures to a smooth surface without any obvious seams. And as far as easy and lazy is concerned, you can't really argue with those results. Mamma mia! And with the body mostly finished though, it's time to make his head. I'll start with a solid block and then work my way towards a somewhat recognizable face. I'm trying to keep a balance between BOWSER's immediately recognizable facial features while still allowing room for a more realistic style. Fortunately, BOWSER has some pretty big identifiers, like his fiery red eyebrows and his bulbous nose / upper lip area. I think that as long as I can keep those in place, I can probably get away with a lot of other subtle changes. And then once I've got the head mostly finished, I can attach it to the body before adding the finishing touches. The neck gets blended into the body and then I can add a little bit of texture via my roller and clay shapers. Now, is it just me, or does a bald, super jacked, hornless BOWSER look a little like Kimbo Slice? Anyways, I poke some dents into his toes so that I can add some talons to his claws, then using the old cling film and shaper trick, I'll add some scars and skin marks. Finally, as some additional little highlights, I'll strategically smoosh some tiny balls around his body, and then blend them in by way of the old pokey pokey. And then a couple big pokes will give me a place to place my horns, and then I can get started on his hands. These start out as blobs of clay that will either get curled into an angry fist or an outstretched hand. With the fist, I find it's easiest to start with a mitt, then cut some fake fingers out rather than making the fingers individually. Then I can simply add the thumb over top and stick it onto my arm stump. The outstretched hand though will have the fingernails exposed, so like I did with the toes, I'll poke some dents to allow for little towels to get popped into place, then I can blend it in using a bit more texture like I did with the rest of the arm. Then it's time to get to work on his scaly Bowser belly. I'll start by rolling out a whole bunch of little wormy dealies, then pressing them into place using one of my oversized ball styluses to give it a bit of an interesting texture. Then I can add his scaly banana hammock and work my way down the tail, carving out the individual armor plates. Of course, what's a King Koopa without his shell? I'll start by smashing a ball into an appropriately shaped flat chunk and then get the right angle by shaping it onto my already baked Bowser body. Then I'll bake the entire thing in the oven to make sure it retains its shape so that I can use it as a base to add the detail. Because it's been baked, it's easy to use a knife and some files to create the segmented sections, as well as create a lot of the nicks and scrapes. Then I'll paint a little bit of Bacon Bond over the entire surface so that I can add the top section over top. This will get smoothed out until it's just a few millimeters from the edge, and then I can add the individual sections of the shell. Once I've covered the shell, I can blend the edges and sharpen the divides between the sections before using my ball stylus to add a semi-smooth texture. Then I'll add some nicks and cuts before poking big indents into each of the individual sections. These indents will be housing for each of the shell spikes, which will then get dropped into place and blended in using small wormy dealies around the base. Finally, I can add the final details to Bowser. These will include his eyebrows, the little patch of hair on top, and his various emo bracelets. Now before I catch hell in the comments, I know that I've left his biceps bracelets out, but I couldn't find a way to fit them over top of his ridiculously large muscles without them looking silly, so I'm just going to go with artistic license and not do them. Otherwise, he's finished and ready for one final bake, which means it's time to get started on our tiny Italian plumber. I wanted to stick with a semi-realistic style here, but I also wanted Mario to retain his characteristically ill-proportioned body, so I'll start by making his head so that I can get the rest of his body to match the correct size. Or incorrect size, I suppose is more accurate. Making his head follows the usual guidelines though, so I'll mark out the center line as well as the eyes, nose, and mouth, then cut the cheeks down to give me my shape. Then I'll add his oversized nose and strong Italian chin. I also only need to make his bottom lip since I'll be adding his trademark plus-size flavor saver later. Now, I was trying to figure out before I got started what kind of style I wanted to go with for Mario. I considered the paunchy, kinda chubby, somewhat comedic look, but decided that if Bowser is going to be a big 15-foot tall bodybuilding monster, then Mario needs to be appropriately heroic. So naturally, I settled on the square-jawed superhero you might see on a Soviet Union propaganda poster. Of course, if I've gone with a square-jawed Joseph Mario, then I need to make sure his body fits the theme as well, so I decided to go with that beer-bellied lumberjack look. You know the look, the big round gut but tree trunks for arms. Now just try and tell me that's not the ideal Mario body. So all I need to do then is add the clothing on top, and the easiest way to do this is just to add little bits of clay around the edges and then blend them in so that he looks like he's almost too buff for his shirt. Then I can fill in any of the gaps and add his overalls. His boots are just basic little leather lumps, and I made him a mighty pipe weapon out of armature wire and brass tubing. He'll be holding this defiantly over his right shoulder as he strikes what might be the single most heroic pose I've ever sculpted. Finally, however, we're on to the painting, so I'll start by flicking him until he's primed in beige. Then I'll start by laying down my base coats and working my way up to the smaller detail. I've decided to stick with Mario's basic red and blue theme because I like it and it's quick and easy, which makes me like it even more. I'll paint his leather boots with a leather brown, and then his shirt and hat get a nice red coat, and his blue jean overalls get a coat of blue jean overall blue. Then I can paint his little white gloves white and get to work on those tiny little details. Pro tip here, if you've got the shaky hands of a middle-aged alcoholic and you're terrible at painting eyeballs, then make sure to angle the camera in such a way that no one can actually see what you're painting. Finally, with this +2 pipe of Koopa Slang painted gunmetal gray, I'll add some manly arm hair before giving everything a quick dry brush with lighter tones to highlight some of the edges. Then it's on to painting the mighty king of Koopas himself. Same as Mario, I started with a beige primer. This is particularly important since I want to paint Bowser mostly orange, and orange is notoriously hard to get a good coat. I am, however, using contrast paints, which are pretty heavily pigmented, but should settle into all the surface textures quite nicely. I'll give the raised areas a quick wash with a darker color to make them stand out before painting his chest and bony extrusions with a bone white. His trademark green head will get painted, well, green, and then I'll go over all the bone white sections with a sepia wash. This gets into all the cracks and adds easy shading. It also helps to give all the horns, bones, and armored plates a nice weathered look. Finally, everything gets a quick dry brush to help sharpen the edges, and then I can get started painting in all the finer details. Now, I considered giving him a blue shell, but thought that was just crazy. So I got the traditional green base coat, followed by bone white spikes and a sepia wash for coloring. Then I repainted the tips with a very thin bone white to help make the transition a little cleaner before adding a black wash between the plates of the shell. Then I'll use a little hot glue on the inside and I can stick it onto Bowser's back, which means the only thing left to do is build a base. I'll start by marking out lines half an inch apart, which will be the width of my brick flooring. Then I can add the vertical cuts to separate the lines into individual bricks, and using a dull pencil I'll retrace the lines, which will give the bricks a lot more depth. I'll also cut some of the edge bricks off so that it's a bit more interesting, but apparently I didn't film that part because I'm bad at my job. Otherwise I'll use a couple different materials to carefully add some surface detail. And with the detail done, I'll give it a quick coat of black Mod Podge, followed by a gray base coat, and I'll paint a few bricks with different shades for variation. Then the entire thing gets a heavy coating of black wash. And then finally, to make all the edges and cracks really stand out, I'll give it a dry brush of light gray followed by white. And all that's left to do then is stick our dynamic duo in place. However, once I'd gotten Mario in place, I realized it was a little empty and I didn't want to overload the base too much, so I made a tiny question block and a whole slew of hallucinogenic mushrooms to help build up Mario's side. So with our mushrooms in place, we're on to the Glamour Shots. As always, a huge thank you to the folks over on Patreon who help make these tiny nerdy things a weekly occurrence. And a very special shout out to my newest patrons, Ken, Rice Walker, Robot Parker, Isa Farnick, Richard D, Weldon Weldon, Jensel Pencil, Cole Boudreau, Natty Barnes, and Z McCorkill. You are the red hallucinogenic mushroom that fuels my plumbing-related nightmares. Let me know down below what you think, and let me know what dinosaurs with guns you'd like to see next. Of course, if you're new here, then now feels like a great time to subscribe and ring that little notification bell. I've got new videos pretty much every Friday, so if you like this, then come on back and see what's next. And if you hated it, then also come on back so you can judge me with the power that only internet anonymity can provide. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Cheers.